Hi everyone, Elsie Jensen here. Tonight we are going to bake up some sourdough bread. We're going to make a kind of a lamb balsamic cream sauce to go with some Halloween themed ravioli. It's ridiculous and cute at the same time. And then we'll probably cut up some melon. So let's start by getting our sourdough popped in the oven. I have my Dutch oven preheated nice and hot at 500 for the last, I would say it's been about 45 minutes that it's been in the oven. I'm gonna flip this guy out. This is the sourdough we prepped up yesterday during our lunchtime stream, and it's been cold proofing in my refrigerator. So we're gonna do a nice expansion score. And I just like to cut in nice and deep. And then, since I'm always super plain, we'll do our classic wheat leaf. There we go. And we're gonna pop this in our nice and toasty hot Dutch oven here. And we're gonna pop it in the oven and we're gonna bake it for 20 minutes at 500 with the lid on. And then we'll bake it for 20 minutes at 450 with the lid off. And by then, dinner should be ready. Okay, let's get this guy in the oven. Again, we're gonna bake it at 500 with the lid on for 20 minutes. Here we go. I'm gonna set my timer. And let's start on prepping our lamb, because we're gonna saute our lamb up and then we're gonna make this lovely sauce. So I have a good old lamb roast here. And first what we're gonna do is we're gonna trim off some of this fat because as you can see on the outside of it, it has like this nice bit of fat, which is when you're cooking it up in the oven at high, like, you know, on a roast, that is great. But when we're gonna do a pan sear, that fat is just going to be pretty chewy. So I'm just going to take it off, as much of it as possible. It's okay if you've got a couple little, you know, ribbons of fat in there, but if taking off the majority of it is gonna get rid of that rubbery texture of it. And lamb is such a tender meat that it actually, like, chopping up the roast and sauteing it is just delicious. It doesn't get tough, not like, you know, beef can get tough, but lamb, I feel, is just such a tender meat. And while it is a little bit gamey, it's not overpowering in the gamey flavor. And it's just really lovely. Like, my children all love lamb. One of their favorite things is lamb lollies. I do them at Easter. They absolutely love it. It's like one of their favorite meals. Okay, we're gonna get this just fat trimmed off. This was a 6-pound roast, but I cut off a portion of it to make a stew, since we didn't need all 6 pounds of meat here. There we go. I'm just gonna grab some of these areas with the fat and trim it down. And then we're gonna cube it up into nice bite-sized pieces, and then we'll season them and saute them off. So I'm gonna take our meat here, and then I'm just gonna cut it up into some manageable strips. That way it's a little bit easier to kind of cut through. And I'm using my cleaver here to chop up my meat, which I always say cleaver is a wonderful knife if you do a lot of meat prep, which means like slicing up your meat into smaller pieces. The cleaver really does do it a lot easier than a regular knife.
You have a question. What cut of lamb is it?
This is just a lamb. I believe it's a leg roast. No, not a leg. It's a shoulder roast on there. It's the roast that you get from Costco. It's a shoulder roast, and it's lovely. It comes, when I take it out of the package, it's of course netted, so it doesn't, you know, it keeps its roast shape, but I always take the netting off so that I can kind of cube it up versus if I'm doing it in the oven. And this one is actually just quite a lovely roast on here. We had like that good, nice kind of bit of fat around it, but I don't have as much veining. Sometimes I'll have a lot of veining of fat in it, but this one looks pretty wonderful. So we're just gonna cube it up here into nice little bite-sized pieces that we'll saute up to a nice kind of medium rare. So they'll be nice and tender. You don't want to overcook it, but luckily, again, lamb is a very tender meat. There we go. And we'll get this guy all cut up. And I always find just cutting it into like the strips of the thickness, that makes it a little bit easier to kind of trim up. I think this is a pretty good piece of fat, so I'm going to take it off. And then our seasoning today, a lot of times I'll use sage with lamb, but today I opted, because we're going to do a balsamic cream sauce, and I feel like balsamic and sage don't really complement each other as well. So I'm actually sticking with rosemary, oregano, and some herbes de Provence, as well as black pepper, garlic, salt, and onion powder as our seasoning here. And then a little bit of Worcestershire as well. And that's just gonna keep the lamb nice and juicy. But I will say, one of my favorite spices that I typically do with lamb is sage, because sage is a very earthy spice, and it really picks up well on the earthiness of the lamb, as well as like the gaminess. Really like makes it blend well. Okay, got these strips. We'll get these all chopped up. And that's one thing it's nice about, you can get the lamb roast from Costco, and they're big, and you don't need to just use them for a roast. I always feel like, the roast is, yes, the simple comes to mind, but you can cube this meat up and cook it up and then use it in a pasta or in a soup. A lot of times I'll make homemade naan, and then I'll do like a lamb pocket kind of with it, a sandwich with sauteed lamb. So it doesn't have to just be done in roast form. Just gotta make enough space on here to cube up this last bit. And then we can start seasoning it, and then saute it. There we go. And just gonna get some of these pieces of fat right out of the middle, because again, you don't wanna, this fat isn't gonna render down, because we're not cooking it that long, so it will remain chewy if you keep, large pieces on.
You have a question? What does lamb taste like?
It is similar, almost lost a good piece there, similar to beef, but it has a bit of a gamier flavor, but it is much more tender. But it is quite lovely. I'm gonna wash my hands real quick. But I was gonna say, I will say, it's like a mixture almost between, if you've ever had bison before, it's like bison, but a very tender bison. It has a little bit of that gamey flavor to it. It's not super overpowering, but it's delicious.
And is the price comparable to beef?
Actually, I find it's a little bit cheaper for the roast. While I feel like a chuck roast nowadays is pretty expensive. So it was about 6 pounds of my lamb roast was $35 from Costco. And for the same amount for a chuck roast from Costco was almost $50. So it was about $15 cheaper for about the same amount of meat. And granted, we're feeding a lot of people here, but I do portion it off to have about, 1.5 pounds to 2 pounds to use for a soup. And then we have this. So actually it's a pretty reasonable price for the roast parts. Okay, we put in about a tablespoon of Worcestershire sauce over here. That Worcestershire has a vinegar base, which is going to cut through the fat in the lamb and help keep it nice and juicy. We're going to add in our oregano. Now, there are cuts of lamb that are quite expensive, like lamb lollies are definitely more expensive for what you get for them, but they are delicious. Lamb chops are very reasonably priced as well. They're not super expensive. And they almost look like little mini T-bone steaks. So we put in about 1.5 teaspoons of dried oregano. We've got our onion powder. We're going to use about 2 teaspoons of onion powder. I'm going to really shake this over. This is going to give it a nice, lovely flavor. And then I have my dried rosemary. And you could use crushed rosemary as well. We're going to use about 1 teaspoon of rosemary. Rosemary's got a stronger flavor, so I don't need to use quite as much to get it there. And if you use fresh, I would kind of mince it up and use maybe closer to a tablespoon because it's not as strong when it's fresh as it is dried. And then I've got some herbes de Provence, which is just kind of like a French seasoning blend. And we're gonna put in about a teaspoon or so of this. And then we're gonna sprinkle about a teaspoon of black pepper, since this is a good amount of meat. So we're gonna give a nice sprinkle over it, and then we're gonna finish it off with about 2 or so teaspoons of garlic salt. Here we go. And I'm gonna give it a nice little, over there, we've got a good coating. And while I'm gonna toss this, but I'm gonna get my oil starting to go so that we can start sauteing this up. I'm putting in about, I think I have about 2 tablespoons in here, maybe a little bit, maybe a tablespoon and a half. I'm just using up the rest of that olive oil. If I need some more, I'll grab some, but I'm gonna grab some tongs so that I can toss my lamb in the spices. And just kind of coat this up. So it's almost kind of doing a little bit of a dry rub on it, but we have that Worcestershire on there.
Yeah, cowboy hat and a mustache.
Say yeehaw. There we go. But we're gonna just toss it here so that each piece gets its nice good flavoring on it. I really want to make sure these are well seasoned so that you know, they have all this great flavor, because we'll be tossing these in our pasta at the end. And I'm gonna do a lovely balsamic cream sauce, which is similar. Kind of the inspiration of this dish is this meal I've had at Maggiano's, which I think is a chain Italian restaurant, but they have it here in Nashville. And they make this braised beef in a balsamic cream sauce with Parpendel pasta. And I love the balsamic cream sauce, and so I'd make my variation on it, and I was like, oh, this will go really well with the lamb. And then I told you I had really cute Halloween ravioli that we're gonna use because, you know, I'm a sucker for anything holiday. And I was like, ooh, bats and pumpkins, we need those in our life. We don't, but we do. And Evie is asking, she asks every day if we can have pasta, and I was like, we can't have pasta every day. We had it 2 days ago. But I was like, you know what, we can have pasta tonight because I'm just feeling it. There we go. So we've got these nice and toasty. Apparently I forgot to turn on my burner over here. So let it warm up. Let me swirl my olive oil around. You know what, I think I'm just gonna grab a smidge more of olive oil. There we go. Because I have a lot of meat here. And I want it to kind of cook up here. So once it's nice and hot, I'm gonna drop in our meat, and then we'll cook it in batches. Don't just throw all of your meat in here at one time. We wanna saute it off, both get a good nice saute on each side. So while we are waiting for that, I am going to move this right up here, and that way I can bring my other cutting board down. And we can start prepping up some of our vegetables and whatnot for our pasta sauce. So let's get our onions. I'm gonna dice these up. We're gonna add, for our sauce, which is mainly gonna be the balsamic cream, but we're gonna mince up some onions, mince up some garlic, and then we'll also throw in some spinach, because you gotta have a little greenery, and then some green onions. We'll get these. My onions, since I don't want them to have a huge presence in the sauce, but I do want their flavors, I'm going to slice them rather thin right now, and then we'll mince them up so that they'll caramelize up nicely, but they'll just be small and really blend into the sauce. There we go. And then I'm gonna check my little radiant heat, see if my pan is nice and hot to start sauteing off our lamb. You don't want to throw your meat in there if your oil is not hot enough or your pan is not hot enough, because then you're just gonna have all of the natural juices in the meat kind of seep out.
You have a question? Do you ever make spicy food?
No, I do not like spicy food. It is so hard for me to eat, and it's not that it won't taste lovely, but I need to have like a gallon of liquid to go with because I can't handle it at all. I'm such a spice baby. I mean, it took me years to start liking pepper. I used to think just plain black pepper was too spicy. Now I do like spices, just nothing that is hot and spicy. And I wish I could handle it, but I can't. Like when I have a friend and if we go out to Indian, and I'm always like, make it so mild that you forgot to add the spice in. That's how mild I want it. I wanted to just look at the spice container. You don't need to add that in because I just can't handle the heat. There we go. So we're gonna mince these up, and I feel like we got some good residual heat coming off here. So what I'm going to do is I'm gonna get a drop of water, and as long as it sizzles, then I'll be good to drop in my meat. There we go. Got a nice little sizzle happening here. So again, I'm not gonna put all of it in here at one time. We're gonna cook, probably can get it in 2 batches, but I want it to kind of make sure that they're not stacked up on top of each other, but really just sauteing in there, getting their own space on our pan. And then we'll flip them halfway and cook the other way. And then we're gonna remove all of our meat out of here, and we'll make our sauce, and then we'll add our meat back in at the very end so it doesn't get overcooked. There we go. And then as we get closer, we'll start cooking up our ravioli, but we don't need to do that ravioli, especially when you buy it in the package. It takes like no time to cook up. Even fresh ravioli makes no time to cook. Okay, get a few more pieces in here. And again, do not crowd your pan. It is better to make multiple batches than to dump it all in there, because when you dump it all in there, 2 things: not every piece is going to be touching the bottom of the pan, which is going to prevent you from getting a nice good sear on it. And then on top of that, it's also going to cool your pan down, which is also going to prevent the searing, and it's going to cause the natural juices to seep out, so you'll have a drier meat. Okay, we're mincing up our onions here because I do want them nice and small so that they'll caramelize up and just be lovely. And we're going to cook them in our meat drippings with a smidge of butter. And now we're going to add in some garlic here. I'm going to mince it up, so I've got a couple cloves of garlic. Because garlic is a good part of our thing, I'm going to add a good amount. Maybe not all of this.
You have a question? What seasonings on the lamb?
So the lamb, we have rosemary, oregano, herbes de Provence, onion powder, garlic, salt, and black pepper, and a little bit of Worcestershire. So pretty simple, but lots of flavor. And they all kind of are in like the same family of flavors that will really work well together. And I picked these spices because I feel like they are going to complement the balsamic cream sauce. Now, as I said earlier, a lot of times I really love sage with lamb because they just work well. But with the balsamic cream, I felt like the sage and the balsamic would compete with each other instead of complement. So I opted for this. I almost did. So I have this crazy ravioli, but they also have this butternut squash ravioli with caramelized onions. I almost chose that to go with my lamb, and I was going to do a brown butter and sage sauce for that. But we'll save that for another day, or another variation of it. Looks like my dog has got a hairball. There we go. So we're going to mix this up, and then I'm going to flip my lamb here, because I've got some little pieces of it that are definitely ready to flip. So I'm going to start in the middle, and what I want is a nice great sear on it, which is what we're getting with this lovely kind of crust. You can see this kind of nice brown crust on it. Now I don't want to overcook my lamb to where it is chewy. I want it to be nice and pink in the middle, like a nice medium rare, because knowing that when I take it out of this pan, this lamb is going to still continue to cook through from the residual heat, and we're gonna be throwing it back into the sauce. So you wanna cook it just under what you would wanna eat it at, knowing that it's gonna continue to cook. And that's kind of the trick is, I feel like so many people will cook and they're like, oh, it was perfect when I had it, but then it sits in your pan and it continues to cook. It's the same theory as when you cook a steak or a roast or a chicken and you let it rest for about 10-15 minutes out of the heat. It continues to cook, but it traps in all of those nice juices as well. There we go. So I've got these all just about turned over, and we'll let them kind of saute up on the other side. A few more pieces here. Perfect. And then let's finish mincing up. I want my garlic to be kind of, it doesn't have to be super small where you have a garlic paste, but I don't want it to be super, super chunky where you're getting a really big chunk. So we're gonna just mince it up. Now, you can also use your good old jarlic if you don't want to take the time to mince it up. And I would say you're going to use about a tablespoon or so of garlic. I will say, now this is like, I will say semi-fresh garlic, so they peel it for you, but they don't mince it. The big difference that I have found between this and garlic, the garlic already minced in a jar, is the garlic in a jar is a bit more acidic and not quite as mild in flavor. Okay, I'm going to turn this down a second. We're going to go check on our bread. We're going to take the lid off and then cook it for the remaining 20 minutes at 450. There we go. So we had our sourdough in here at 500 for 20 minutes with the lid on. That helps prevent it from getting too dark in color and traps in the moisture. There's our beautiful pop on our expansion score there. And now we're going to pop this in. And I'm going to turn my heat down to 450. And this is to prevent it from getting too dark of a crust. And then for 20 minutes. So let me push it. There we go. I like to cook my sourdough bread to like a blondish brown. I don't like it too dark because I find if you cook it too dark, what happens is you get a really like crunchy, hard crust. And I like a nice chewy crust, but one that the next day isn't a rock. I like it to still be chewy the next day. So I do a nice kind of blonde like bake on it. There we go. So it looks like we're pretty close on our lamb here. That I'm going to grab a plate and we will take this batch out. Again, I want it to be kind of pink in the middle, pinkish, a little bit red, because I do want it to be like a medium rare. You're going to cook it essentially like beef as well. So knowing it's also going to continue to cook in from the residual heat. So we're going to pull this out. And again, this is our lamb roast that we cubed up. And one thing that I have found that lamb is much more a lamb roast is much more tender than a chuck roast or a beef roast. It is just a very tender meat. There we go. And I know it's crazy because it's not as popular here as it is in Europe and other places, but it is delicious. Okay, we've got our first round of our lamb, and we're going to sit it there. Again, we want it to be about a medium rare with a nice pink center in the middle of it. And we're going to add in our next batch, and we'll saute this up, and then we can make our sauce. There we go. Just spread this over here. And turn up my pan. And then what we'll do is we'll pull all of this out. And then we'll make our sauce in here, which will actually whip up pretty quickly. So I'm just spreading it out, making sure that it each has a nice little place to cook on here. Okay. We've got our garlic and our onions minced up, which will be ready to throw in there when we're ready. Once my water comes to a really good boil, I'm going to pop in our ravioli, but again, our ravioli doesn't need much time to cook. While we're waiting for that, I'm gonna prep up our hammy melon that we're gonna have as our fruit tonight. Let me just wash my hands real quick. And then, we grab a bowl. You've never had hammy melon before. It looks like a cantaloupe on the outside, but its flavor is similar to honeydew, but it has a crunch like an Asian pear, and it is delicious. So we're gonna cut this guy down. So we've got our seeds and everything. We'll pop those out. And while, again, it looks like a cantaloupe, it does not taste like a cantaloupe. It does not have a musk flavor like cantaloupe has. And I think the best part about it is if you've ever had an Asian pear, you've got this light, airy crunchiness to it. The hammy melon has that. So it's like a crunchy, but not like a tough crunchy, but like a light and airy, crunchy honeydew melon.
Where do you find it?
So this one I got from Costco, but I know my regular grocery store like Publix carries it. I know Kroger has it. So it's actually gotten to be a lot more common than it used to be, but it is delicious. And I always like to try, I always do kind of like, my kids love melons, and melons are something that is pretty reasonably priced, that you can get a lot of fruit out, and I love to give kind of fresh fruit for my kids as much as possible. So we're gonna slice this, and then I'm gonna show you my trick for kind of cutting up a melon pretty quickly.
Can you roast the seeds?
No, you can't roast the seeds on it. It's not like a squash or whatnot, and they're really tiny seeds. Let's flip our lamb over here because it's about halfway. Beautiful. We got this nice sear on it. And then we'll finish up chopping those up, and then this next part should be done, which means we can start making our sauce. And hopefully everything will come together at just the perfect time. I know I was kind of deciding all sorts of things. I almost did a lamb stew with dinner tonight, but I was like, Evie was like, can we have pasta? And I'm like, we just had pasta, but I was like, but we can have pasta. Evie's my biggest food critic. You know, she's the one who I will say 4 out of my 5 kids to like something. The one who's typically the dissenter is Evie. But she's got an interesting palate. She likes lemons and limes, eats like just strange salmon. Loves salmon, loves lamb, but won't eat a potato unless it's a salt and vinegar chip. Okay, so the trick here with kind of cutting up your melon is you kind of cut it in long strips, and then you're gonna make your individual slices down just like that. But when you do that, it's going to allow your melon to lay flat on your thing. So you're just gonna have to push your knife down here, and then using the base of your cutting board, you can slide your blade across, and it makes it really easy to cut your perfect bite-sized pieces of your melon.
You have a question. Are your kids picky eaters?
No, not really. They all go through stages of pickiness. Now, I will say all but Evie. Evie is a picky eater, although I think she probably eats more than most kids. She's just a picky eater for our family. But no, my kids will eat pretty much everything I make of it. Now, my husband is a completely different side of it. He is a very picky eater. But one thing that I decided when my kids are young, that I wasn't going to be a short order cook. I was going to cook one meal, and that was what our family was going to eat. And the way I make sure that nobody goes hungry and everybody is happy is I ensure that there is at least 1 or 2 things at every meal that my kids like. So whether it's the bread or the fruit or the meat or the vegetable or whatnot, there's always going to be 1 to 2 things that they can eat and fill their bellies up on, but I'm not going to cook them a separate meal. And I find it's just, when you have a large family, you can't please everybody. I grew up and I never understood that really until I had my own kids. But I'm the youngest of 10. My mom had 7 and I had 3 older half-brothers. And I always remember growing up, my mom saying, I can't please you all. And it is hard. It is very hard to please a crowd. And I found that this is just the method that works well for our family. And then of course I always, like, if I know I make a meal one day that isn't somebody's favorite, I try to make a meal that they do like the next day to kind of go on there. Except for my husband, he doesn't have to say. He can be happy that he gets his delicious food and the dishes to clean up afterwards. Okay, I'm gonna take our lamb out here. I'm gonna turn this down. Don't worry if you've got this nice kind of tasty bit stuck on the bottom of your pan. When we add in some of our pasta water, what we're gonna do is deglaze the pans, and all of these nice tasty bits, which are the spices and the onion powder and little bits of meat that have stuck to it, they will come up into the sauce and they're gonna add a lot of body and flavor to the sauce. So don't try to scrub them off, don't get rid of them, because you want these little tasty little tidbits on the bottom of your pan. They're not burnt, they're just stuck on caramelized spices that will add a lot of flavor. So don't, if you have that issue at home, don't think that you've messed up. This is what you want. You want those tasty bits.
Do you make homemade dinner every night?
Not every night, but most nights, because A, it's cheaper to make food at home. I also really love cooking. I've got a little bit of butter here. And, you know, it's just a passion of mine. Now, we do get takeout or go out to eat, I think around like once a week, depending on, you know, our schedule or whatnot. Sometimes more when we have sports. That gets kind of crazy. But I do try to cook most of our meals for our family. And then I also cook my meals for my parents as well. We're going to add in our onions here. And we're going to let them kind of caramelize. Our water here is nice and boiling. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of salt. And then we're going to pop our ravioli in for it to cook. Again, it doesn't take long. I'm going to add in about, you know, a teaspoon and a half of salt. A couple good pinches. And then we've got our cute and ridiculous pumpkin and bats ravioli. That's one thing I do love about Costco is they also support my love for holidays, and they always do holiday themed ravioli. So you can get shamrocks at St. Patrick's Day, hearts at Valentine's Day. So we're gonna pop these in here, but they're just cute little pumpkins, and they're just filled with cheese. They're not like, you know, a pumpkin ravioli with pumpkin in there, for those of you who aren't as adventurous like my husband. But they're just a fun little thing. My kids love it. We're gonna just pop these in here. These only take about 3 minutes or so to cook up and get nice and tender. You typically know when they're done is when they all are kind of floating and billowing at the top of your pan. We grab a spoon here. I'm gonna grab a spoon for both so I can actually give that a stir. We're gonna kind of coat our onions up in these nice little savory, tasty bits. I'm gonna let them caramelize for a second, and then we'll add our garlic in. But the onions need a little bit more time. And as you can see, just adding the onions and a little bit of butter already takes up a lot of those toasty little tasty bits on the bottom of your pan. But when we add our liquid in, our starchy water from our pasta, that will deglaze the rest of it. There we go. So I've got this cooking over about a 4. We're gonna let that saute for just a minute or two. I'll finish up my rest of my hammy melon. Get these. And I find, if you ever get stuck of like, oh, when do you prep your fruit? I find if you make your fruit prep, like if you buy it whole like I do, as a part of your dinner time prep, you're not having to be back in the kitchen at another time, and you have your fresh fruit at your dinner. I always like to serve fresh fruit with dinner. And it's something that you can do in the time that you have, you know, waits in cooking, because cooking isn't constant all the time. There's definitely gaps. And I always try to fill it in with other, you know, tasks so that I minimize the amount of time I spend in the kitchen, you know, cooking. And just gets it all done at one time. Although I will say for us, my kids we will finish this whole bit of melon tonight for dinner. We eat a lot of fresh fruit. I buy an insane amount of fresh fruit each week. And, but with a large family, we just go through a lot of fresh fruit. But it, you know, nothing beats it. And I think it's, you know, growing up, we never had fresh fruit with dinner. It was always something that was like a breakfast or a lunch thing. But I always serve it at dinner, because dinner and lunch are the two, you know, things that I can really control and, you know, make sure they get at lunch. They're at school, so I don't know if they eat the fruit that I packed them. But dinner, they're sitting in front of me, so I know they get it. Okay, let's add in our garlic here. We have about, this is probably a little over a tablespoon of our minced up garlic. I'm gonna let it get nice and toasty in there. Bring out those great flavors. Here we go. And then I'm gonna poke some of my raviolis down under to make sure, but you can see they're already starting to billow up to the top. So they're gonna be done in just a little bit. Here we go. It smells wonderful. That garlic is fabulous. Before I strain our ravioli, I'm going to ladle out some of this starchy water so that I can use it in my pasta sauce as a bit of a thickener for it. Now I'm also going to be using cream, because it is going to be a balsamic cream sauce, but this just means you don't have to use as much. So I'm saving about a cup. My pasta should be done, so I'm going to get my strainer here. And we're going to strain it. You don't want to overcook your ravioli, or they will pop and leak out their really good insides. There we go. So I'm going to let them sit right there, and then we'll throw them in our sauce when we get closer to it. Okay, this smells fabulous. Now before we add in our starchy water here, we're gonna add in some balsamic glaze. You can also just take balsamic vinegar, add a little bit of sugar, and then reduce it down until it kind of forms a little bit of a syrup. But you can also get this glaze at the store, which is just a reduction. I added in about a tablespoon, maybe a tablespoon and a half. This is gonna give a little bit of an acidic note to it, but it's also going to be savory and delicious. And it's going to pair really well with the onions and the garlic and the kind of the cream-based sauce for it. So I'm gonna add in my starchy water here, a little at a time. Kind of mix it around. Let it simmer. And I'm going to bring this up to a little bit of a boil. I don't always add it in all at one time, because I rather add it in slowly to let it incorporate also, so I don't kind of flood it.
You have a question. How many people are you cooking for?
So I'm cooking for 7 will eat tonight, but I always make sure I have leftovers for my parents. So for 9 of it, though a lot of them are little, so like Jack and Teddy, they eat very few, small, because they're 2 and 4. And Evie, she eats like a butterfly, I swear. A little nibble here, a little nibble there. So we typically will have, now sometimes we don't have leftovers and sometimes we do. So whether my parents get this or something else, let's add in. Before we add that in, let's add in our cream, and then we'll kind of taste it. I'm gonna start with about a half a cup of cream. You don't need a whole lot of cream to get a nice rich sauce. So don't think you need to put in a whole bunch. The cream with the starchy water is going to work really well together on there. And then we'll add, of course, Parmesan in just a second. But let me grab a spoon so I can taste this. Delicious. It needs a little bit of salt, which I figured. So we're going to put in about 1.5 teaspoons of salt. Now sometimes I'll use like a bouillon to use as like my salty flavor here, but because I have that part balsamic and then the lamb, I opted for just using some garlic salt. And you don't need to make it as salty because we are going to add Parmesan. That is good. Bring this up to a nice little boil. We're going to add in some spinach, and then we'll add in our pasta in just a second. But let's get our spinach in here. Let it kind of wilt up just a little bit. A little bit of spinach will turn into no spinach because it wilts up. But I find that my kids, they don't mind spinach so much because it really doesn't have that much of a flavor, especially when you have it in such a lovely sauce. There we go. Kind of just give it a good little mix around. We're gonna add in a little bit of our Parmesan right now, and then we'll add in our pasta, and we'll add in our lamb and then our pasta last because it's kind of hard to mix it in. Here we go. So I've just added in a couple good big size flakes. We'll add in more Parmesan, but I don't want to add too much because I don't want it to turn into like a mac and cheese, but more of a cream sauce with that Parmesan notes to it. I'm gonna add just a smidge more cream, like another tablespoon. There we go. Let's add in our lamb. Now make sure if you have any good residual juices, we'll add those in as well because that will add some nice flavor. There we go. And then we're going to toss that in to our sauce. We're going to let that simmer for just a second, and then we'll throw in our pasta, but our sourdough bread is ready to come out. So let's go grab that. Let me just move this out of the way. And then grab my pot holders. So we did 20 minutes at 500 with the lid on, and then we did 20 minutes at 450 with the lid off. Look at that beautiful peak that we got on there. I always love it when I get a nice pop on there with ours. We're gonna take this, I'm just gonna put it right on here. When I bake it in my Dutch oven, it is important to take it out of your Dutch oven because this thing will stay nice and hot for a good amount of time. And you don't want that bottom to get any more cooked up than it already is. There we go. This is our beautiful sourdough loaf. Look at that giant peak. We've got a nice golden brown color on it, and of course, our beautiful wheat leaf design on our loaf. This is our traditional loaf, so our basic sourdough. So delicious, so easy to make. And it's crazy to think that just 3 ingredients, flour, water, and salt, made this because starter is made from just flour and water. So it's very simple, very easy, but very delicious. Okay, we've got our lamb in here. We're gonna add in our ravioli now. I'm gonna just try to make a little base here. And then just be very careful when you're stirring it into the sauces that you are gentle when you break it apart so that you don't tear any of your little bits of ravioli here. Make sure you, let me grab a ladle. And if you ladle the sauce over it, it will break apart very easily. But ravioli can be gentle is what I always say with it, so that you don't ruin it on there. There we go. We'll pull it apart and just keep ladling your beautiful sauce over this. There we go. I've got my bats in here. Pulled that one a little gently. Now you could always, when you're straining it, if you're ready with your sauce, you could dump it in there, but I find this works just fine too. Okay, let's ladle our meat over it. Beautiful. And then we're gonna just let it sit for a second in our pasta sauce. Really soak up those flavors, which is why you wanna cook it just a little under when it's done for it. I'll get my tongs out, that way I can break these apart perfectly in just a second. Here we go. Much easier with the tongs. But you see, you can just pull them apart just ever so gently and allow them to kind of soak up these flavors. Beautiful. Okay, we're gonna cover this with our Parmesan cheese, and we are going to serve up our dinner. Beautiful. Again, this is our lovely Parmesan balsamic cream sauce. We added in some spinach. Now I'm gonna sprinkle on our Parmesan cheese over the top, and we'll let it kind of steam up in here for it to melt. There we go. Now I just have my residual heat heating it up. But I'm going to grab my plate, and we're gonna get ready to serve up our dinner here. Let me just slide these guys over. Put this right here. And we're gonna get dinner going. Okay. Got my Parmesan cheese, and let's grab a plate. Let me grab my little shovel for when we scoop this out. Okay, for dinner tonight, we have our pumpkin and bat ravioli. Let's see if I can find a bat right here. So we've got our lovely pumpkin and bat ravioli, fresh from Costco. It's filled with, delicious cheeses. But what is actually the best part about this is our lamb Parmesan and balsamic cream sauce, which has a tangy yet savory flavor to it. We added in some sauteed spinach, onions, and minced up garlic to flavor it up, as well as our Parmesan cheese on it. And then we will serve it with a nice slice of our homemade sourdough bread. This is our traditional loaf, and again, it has this nice golden brown crust on it and this beautiful peak, and of course some nice hammy melon as well. And let's not forget, we need to sprinkle a little bit of Parmesan cheese on the top. Well guys, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I try to do live cooking shows every single day, kind of show you what we're making for our family and hopefully teach you guys something along the way. Again, we do upload all of our videos to the link on our page, so if you ever want to recreate any of these recipes at home, you can just go to that page, search for what we made, and you can watch and cook along with me again. We also have a link to our Amazon storefront that has all of our different cooking gear and gadgets. We've got our 6-quart all-clad saute pan, our cutting boards, our knives, all the different gadgets I use in the kitchen I have in there for you guys to check out. But again, thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe.